do with it. There's all those weapons we're giving the Sunnis in Baghdad. So look out. Believe me, that war is not over. And right now, they're demanding more troops in Afghanistan. And some people, like the senator, he thinks we should be there for 100 years if necessary. How can he commit the young people of this world 5 more generations to be in Iraq if it's necessary? I say it's time to come home.
Senator McCain, you got... Senator McCain, 30 seconds.
I guess very briefly, it's not American casualties, it's American presence. I mean, not American presence, it's American casualties. We've been in South Korea for 50 years. We've been in Japan and Germany since the end of World War II. We're in Kuwait. It's up to the Iraqi government and the United States government. Anybody who thinks it's the length of time we're there that matters, it's American casualties that matter, and those casualties have been dramatically reduced thanks to these brave and courageous young men and women who we should be supporting and not condemning what they're doing.
Gentlemen, if we can, let's move on. In his second inaugural, President Bush made clear that this country would no longer trade stability for democracy, yet relations with Pakistan seem to test that. Senator Thompson, would your administration continue to back Pakistani President Musharraf despite polls that show 2/3 of the Pakistani people want him to resign immediately?
Oh my goodness, go against a poll? How could anybody ever do that? In the first place, you can tell that the news is good coming out of Iraq because you read so little about it in the New York Times. Yeah, we have different interests as far as Pakistan's concerned. It's a very important nation to us in many respects. I had the opportunity with others to visit with President Musharraf some few years ago, visit Pakistan, Afghanistan, and that region. Democracy of Pakistan is in the long-term security interest of Pakistan, and therefore it's in our interest. They were moving in that direction before former Prime Minister Bhutto was assassinated. Now they're in the streets. The government is in question. Some of our people, I think, are irresponsibly calling for Musharraf's resignation, for the cutting off of aid, and all those things. There's one little problem with that. Who are you going to get in return? They are the only Muslim nation in the world that has nuclear weapons and a nuclear capability. Our national security interest and whose hands those nuclear weapons are going to be in is an overriding interest of ours. We need to make sure that there is stability in that country to the extent that we can do anything about it, and certainly in the short term anyway, that involves supporting Musharraf, while we continue to encourage him not only to move toward democracy, put those judges back in place that he fired, those dissidents that are in only for political reasons, he needs to release, and he needs to help us more in the western mountains of Afghanistan where the Taliban is still hiding and where Osama bin Laden probably is. We need to put the pressure on him, keep the pressure on him, but let's not ever kid ourselves. Our national security interest requires that those nuclear weapons do not fall into the hands of radicals in Pakistan.
Governor Romney, on Senator Thompson's last point, Musharraf says he's not really looking for Osama bin Laden. Would you continue to support him?
Well, let's stand back and recognize that today foreign policy is no longer like it was in the last century, which was more like a game of checkers. There was our side and their side. We tried to get friends and allies and go after each other. Now foreign policy is more like three-dimensional chess, where we have to understand all the players throughout the world and develop strategies to help move the world towards more stability and safety for ourselves. And our interest in Pakistan is to make sure, number one, that the nuclear weapons are secure. Number two, we go after al-Qaeda, and the power going after al-Qaeda is in General Kiani, who is a friend, and our funds can go to him and to the military to fight al-Qaeda, and we will work with him to find Osama bin Laden. And if for some reason General Musharraf does not want to find Osama bin Laden, then we need to make sure that General Kiani does. And our support will be keyed to being able to provide that kind of support to us. But we also have to make sure that we're going to see a much more robust effort throughout Pakistan to go after al-Qaeda. But we have these three efforts that we're talking about: what's happening in Pakistan, what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in Iraq, and also, of course, the potential trouble in Iran. But we need to think more broadly than just those hot spots and come together with other developed nations, other free nations, as former Prime Minister Aznar of Spain indicated, and develop an effort to help move the world of Islam towards modernity. We as great nations need to help them have the rule of law, have good schools that are not Wahhabi schools, strengthen their economies. We need to become very serious about moving the more moderate voices in the world of Islam to greater strength so that we don't have to spend our blood around the world fighting these wars. We have to fight these because they're hot spots. But ultimately, we're going to have to move the world of Islam because ultimately, Muslims themselves are going to have to reject the extreme.
Governor Huckabee, if Pakistan is politically unstable, are the nuclear weapons really secure? And with polls showing hundreds of millions, or polls, a study showing hundreds of millions of U.S. dollars can't be accounted for, are we throwing good money after bad there?
Well, we've spent $12 billion. It was supposed to be to fight terrorism. We really don't know how much of that money was used to fight terrorism. In fact, we know a lot of it was used to build up their own military. So there is a problem with accountability in the money, and I think we now are in a position more than ever that we should ask the Musharraf government for a better accounting, and it also ought to buy us some leverage with the Musharraf government. I want to agree with my colleagues. Several of them have mentioned that it's not the best idea just to try to push Musharraf out because we don't know who might come into that vacuum. And that's why it is important to make sure that we communicate with him that our displeasure with his inability to go after Osama bin Laden, and part of the problem is he tells us that that part of the area he doesn't control. On the other hand, he says, I don't want you going in, let me do it and give me the money. He can't have it both ways, and that has to be communicated to him in the strongest way. But my final seconds, I'd like to just, with all due respect, Congressman Paul, the issue of whether the president should be in the Middle East comes to something that I think we've got to recognize. We've got one true ally in the Middle East, and that's Israel. It's a tiny nation. I've been there 9 times. I've literally traveled from Dan to Beersheba, and I understand something of that nation and the vulnerability of it. And for us to give the world the impression that we would stand by if it were under attack and simply say it's not our problem would be recklessly irresponsible on our part. And if I were president, you can rest assured that we would not let an ally be annihilated by those enemies which surround it who have openly stated it is their direct intention to destroy that nation. It would not happen under my presidency.
Congressman Paul, 30 seconds.
In many ways, we treat Israel as a stepchild. We do not give them the responsibility that they deserve. We undermine their national sovereignty. We don't let them design their own peace treaties with their neighbors. And then we turn around and say that when you want to do that or you want to defend your borders, they have to check it out with us. I think Israel would be a lot safer. I made the point earlier. We give 3 times as much money to the Arabs. Why do we arm their enemies? So if you care about Israel, you should be against all the weapons that go to the Arab nations. And I just don't see any purpose in not treating Israel in an adult fashion. I think they'd be a lot better off. I think they one time in the 80s took care of a nuclear reactor in Iraq. I stood up and defended Israel for this. Nobody else did at that time. But we need to recognize they deserve their sovereignty just as we deserve our sovereignty. I believe if they assume more responsibility, there would be more peace there, and that there would be a lot less threat to us. And besides, we don't have any money to do this.
We missed you.
We'll extend this quickly. 30 seconds, Mayor Giuliani, then Senator Thompson, and we got to move on.
I think the idea that Israel is a stepchild of the United States is totally absurd. I've been to Israel very often, as the governor has. The Prime Minister of Israel is a very close friend of mine. The former Prime Minister is a very close friend of mine. The reality is that Israel is a close and strong ally of the United States. America has only a few extremely reliable allies, special relationships. The defense of Israel is a critical importance to the United States of America, and it goes much deeper than just tactical things. Secondly, on Musharraf, which was the question that was on the table, we have to have a very clear picture of who and what would replace Musharraf. But we should put more pressure on him to catch bin Laden. I believe I could convince him that we should be allowed to work with him to catch bin Laden, because I think that would be a major breakthrough in crushing al-Qaeda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Senator Thompson.
Governor Huckabee, if I understood him correctly, seemed to be concerned that part of the money we're sending to Pakistan goes to their own military. That's the point.